Hi everyone, my name is Duc Luu. I'm currently a program director at Knight Foundation working on our national journalism portfolio. I've been doing that for a couple of years, and before that I was the publisher for the Washington City paper, which is the local alternative weekly for the Washington DC area. So really excited to see a lot of local news fans in the room. I want to introduce my panelists and also thank the Greater Washington Community Foundation and Darius in particular for helping do a lot of the planning for putting this together, putting all of us here on the stage, and ensuring that we have a great discussion about this wonderful new report about the state of life in Washington, D.C. I want to introduce Allison Dunn-Almaguer. I want to introduce Vanessa Mason and Dr. Wendy Ellis as well. Really excited to have you all, and let's get into some of these questions. Give me a moment. Okay, so in this report, one of the findings that we see is that in the DMV, about half of the region's residents are struggling or suffering. Based on the Gallup's Life Evaluation Index, and slightly more than half of the residents in the region say they are thriving in their overall well-being. So Vanessa, I'd like to start off with you. Overall, the biggest predictor, and we're going to start off with the building blocks here, the biggest predictor on whether or not you are suffering or whether or not you are thriving is this sense of belonging. And what they mean by that is if they feel that the place they live in is the perfect place for them. So let's start at the beginning. What is belonging to you? And why is it so important as a predictor of whether or not you're thriving or suffering?
Sure. It's great to be here with all of you today. So I wanted to share a couple of definitions from some of our grantee partners that we support around belonging at Omidyar Network to really give a lot more texture and a lot more nuance around what we're really talking about when we're talking about belonging. So from the Othering and Belonging Institute, they define belonging as more than just being seen or feeling included. Belonging entails having a voice and the opportunity to use it to make demands upon society and political institutions. Belonging is more than access. It is about the power to co-create the structures that shape a community. Now, I wanted to share that definition first because one thing that I really want to call out is that you'll hear the sort of dichotomy of what's in that definition is that, yes, belonging is about feeling that we are in the place that we need to be, and it is about voice, and it's about the power to influence, and it's about the power to transform our circumstances around us. And so it's really important that you have both halves of that, or otherwise people will feel that they don't belong. And then the second definition that I really want to highlight comes from the Belonging Barometer. So for the data nerds in the room, this is a new metric that was recently released that has 10 areas around belonging, but I just wanted to share a few of them. One is that people feel valued for themselves or for their contributions. Another is that they feel welcome and included. They feel emotionally connected, comfortable expressing their opinion, and that they are able to influence decisions. So again, you see some commonalities and definitions, but in particular, I wanted to call out the Belonging Barometer because a lot of what they talk about to juxtapose belonging is this notion of non-belonging. And importantly, their definition of non-belonging says it's not just about you either belong or don't belong, it's also about ambiguity. So when we're talking about belonging, it's important that we're being clear. It's important that we are being transparent about what we are calling people in to belong to, how we are calling them into belonging, because if there's ambiguity, the perception will be that there is non-belonging. So with that, I want to highlight that why belonging is important inside of those definitions that Omidyar Network. I work on our Building Cultures of Belonging team. In particular, I lead a new grant-making strategy called Cultivating Repair. And so in particular, I want to call this out because we have two grant-making strategies within our Building Cultures of Belonging team. One is New Belonging that really focuses on building cultures of belonging in which communities deepen connection, equality, and respect as they grow more diverse. And so again, underlining this notion that you can't have belonging, it's not in spite of difference, it's really about across difference. And then the work that I I lead with Cultivating Repair is really about building cultures of belonging in which we acknowledge harm and practice repair across communities and generations. And in particular, I'll close really quickly, is that we have envisioned these two strategies to be complementary to each other, that by building the conditions for belonging, you create conditions for repair, and importantly, by pursuing repair and creating those conditions for repair, you create conditions for belonging. And in that sense, that yes, while we can foster people's sense of connection to each other, their sense of voice, that it's also important to address the historical context that people are coming from and living within in order for belonging to continue to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. One place to always get, one thing that I find fascinating about this concept of belonging is that it's both an individual one as well as one as part of a community, right? You need to have your own individual sense of belonging and also what it means to feel connected to others. If you're ever looking for wisdom, look to Christmas movies. In the 1964 rendition of Rudolph, they end with the phrase, "Let's be independent together." There's something about that that's always resonated with me. Wendy, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and also talk about how you link the sense of belonging as an indicator of hope. I find that a really interesting phrase, but please tell us about yourself and belonging and hope and how those things come together for you.
Yes, absolutely. You were just singing all of my tunes there. So I'm the director for the Center for Community Resilience at George Washington University, and also the director for the Institute for Racial, Ethnic, and Socioeconomic Equity at GW. Academicians, we wear many hats. So when you were speaking to, and I think also when we think about the title of this panel, Social Connection, it's more than just something that's aspirational. It is something that is measurable. And there are so many frameworks that are out there in particular that really helps us to understand what is the theory of change. How do we get from point A to point B? And more importantly, how are we going to measure that? So how do we know that we're actually doing as we intended? The investments, the motivations. So one of the things that I have really stressed in working in community in the last 10 years is let's not, make these assumptions that communities, particularly communities of color, are so resilient, as if that's by choice. But I also want us to pause and unpack, because when you were talking about definitions are so important. The definition of resilience comes from physics, and it means an object's ability to retain shape after suffering impact. Okay? So that has nothing to do with prevention. Remember, I'm in public health. That is assuming that there will be injury. So we are going to come in and figure out how to mitigate the injury. Well, if we already know what's coming and we've seen it over generations, then we do have a duty to actually look over our shoulders and stop the intentional harm. And I said intentional because that's exactly what it is. If you know the source and you do little to actually stop it from occurring, then it's intentional. So when we talk about a sense of belonging, what I hear in unpacking multiple adjectives that you use in that definition really comes down to hope. How are our investments actually fostering hope? And why does hope matter? Well, what is the year 2024? What have we experienced just in this capital city? It has been the opposite. Many of the data that we looked at there shows us that there's an increasing sense of fear. Fear that I can't put food on the table. Fear that I can't keep or afford the roof over my head. Fear that my voice will not be heard. That is the absence of hope. That is the absence of belonging. And hope is not some namby-pamby term. There's actually a validated hope scale that I use in my work. And what are the two main components on that validated hope scale that we're looking at? I heard Camille say it earlier. One was agency. The other is motivation. I also heard you saying the same thing. So all of these things are connected, but what I want to really, I think when we look at this report, what we have to really think about is the factors that we're measuring where we're losing ground as far as connectedness, as far as hopefulness, is fear, motivation, agency. So when we do not invest in communities, we are not investing in hope. We're allowing fear to fester. And a basic principle about human emotion is hope is a secondary emotion, meaning that it requires intentionality to be fostered and nurtured over and over again. But fear is instinctual. Fear is the reason why we are still here as the apex predators on this earth. Because if we all heard a commotion and running up those stairs, everyone's looking for the exit. Everyone's diving. No one has to tell you to seek cover. Instinctually, you will do that. But this morning, you made a choice to come here because you thought you could make a difference. You thought that this was important. If you didn't have hope, you would have never gotten out of your bed. So who has invested in you and who has invested in your community? You are a part of a community. And that goes to the second layer here beyond hope, is social cohesion. How well are our investments and the sense of belonging actually fostering social cohesion? And with social cohesion comes social capital. And that's what we're really also talking about, what was reflected in these data, is this idea that my voice can be heard, that I can make a difference. Well, not one person changes a system. It takes force. And that force comes from a collective action. So you've got belonging, you've got hope, you've got social cohesion, and you've got social capital. That's your theory of change. And there are ways, multiple ways to measure these things. That's the work that we do at our center. But I want us to really start to begin to think about how do we use these data in a way that are actionable, and because we're talking about systems change, measurable.
Thank you. Allison, I want to talk to you because I found fascinating what Wendy was talking about in terms of choice and hope. That hope is fundamentally a choice that we have to wake up and do every day. You work as an organizer. You help people organize. Those are choices that people have to make in terms of deciding to try to make their community better. And also putting into practice and making it actionable as well. How is your group, how is the work that you're doing fostering this sense of belonging, giving people the choices, giving people the hope that they need to feel like they belong in this community?
Thank you. So I am Allison Dunn-Almaguer. I'm our executive director and lead organizer of the Washington Interfaith Network. So we are a coalition of about 50 different organizations across all 8 wards of the district. So despite our name, we do have churches, mosques, and synagogues, but we also have groups that are unions and nonprofits. So it is not necessarily about faith, but about goodwill and values-based organizing. So in our role as organizers, our team of organizers, we are a volunteer-led organization. We have a small staff team, but the way our work is led is we have leadership teams within each ward that are leading their own campaigns, coming together with the rest of their team leads across the 8 wards, which is reflected within our leadership board and strategy team, to help do district-wide campaigns. So I say that to share, I think belonging is essential to our work, and everything the 2 of you said was beautiful and powerful. And I do this work because I believe belonging cannot happen without power. And everything you said, it is about agency, you both said, even from reading groups that you fund their own definition. That is the key, is that we're bringing people together across difference, across race, across class, across religion, across sexuality, across anything. And that is hard work. When I think about it, when I first came into this work, people said, well, do you care about the people? I'm like, well, yeah, I care about the people. But it's easy to care about the people. It's really hard to care about people. In relationship, on the ground, when you're next to them, and they may or may not, as some folks said earlier, agree with you. So a lot of our work within WIN-DC is around doing the work to bring people across difference to get to know one another, to build relationships of respect and mutuality, and we recognize that you cannot do a campaign together for the long haul if you don't know one another. So that's the first layer, is helping to get people to connect across difference. We do this by the practice that many of you probably do, one-on-one relational meetings, teaching people how to share your story and what drives you to do this work, not to identify with other people, but to relate. Because we all come from different places, and we all come from different backgrounds, and we cannot pretend we identify with someone who's had a completely different background, but we can relate. This study shows we can relate across fear, the insecurity of housing, or the insecurity of food, or medicine, or where you're gonna be able to take your kids, if it's daycare, or if it's a school that's even funded right now in this district budget. And the second piece, I'll say, is, again, back to agency and power, is around the local campaigns of directly impacted people being able to lead their own belonging. So I want to share just one brief story. And this work, we have worked with the Community Foundation for a very long time in one neighborhood. And that is key because this campaign has now taken 12 years. So if anyone knows the Northwest 1 area of DC, folks know that area, it's North Capitol and K. So there is a building there that was formerly called Temple Courts. It was knocked down 12 years ago. It was partially public housing, but also Section 8, also owned by a development group. And about 12 years ago, the decision was made to knock it down. So district government met with residents, we met with WIN, and folks said, well, you know, it's just really run down. There's rats, there's roaches, there's fires. It's very interesting, right, that management intentionally let that get run down. It got run down, it was closed down, and unfortunately, we did not have the power to stop it. But what we did do is we lived to fight another day and continued to organize. We organized former residents and their children, who now at this point are grown. We organized across race, class, religion, and our first start was in that neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, flashback 8 years ago, one of our first public pressures was on the council member at the time. And I will never forget being in Walker Jones Elementary School and a young girl who was an 8th grader who'd come over, started out our program with about 300 neighborhood residents and the council member sitting in a chair listening to residents. This 8th grader saying what NOMA means, which is what they've renamed that neighborhood. NOMA means no more me and no more people who look like me. That's what my neighborhood means, because we are being pushed out. And the question is, how can we build the power to change that? And we do it through leadership development, teaching that we can demystify government, right? Which is hard, and people can advocate for themselves. So the leader of this work was Nathan Brown, who is a resident, a tenant who we've worked with for years, who grew up in the neighborhood, remembers the barbecues, playing football, and really being within the community. And he began to organize his residents, his former residents, kids and grandkids, because we realized in that meeting, the council member said, yes, I'll refund this, but I actually don't have the jurisdiction. It's the mayor. So 6 months later, we brought it back to WIN, and we had 1,000 people in a room from all 8 wards pushing the mayor and saying, we need you to fund this. This was right before the election. And well, when she got in office, we went back and said, look, we're really ready for this to be refunded. We have residents reorganized. We're keeping them together across distance. Oh, well, there's no money. You belong, but we do not have the money for you. Well, that means they don't belong. If we're not going to create and move systems and structures to allow belonging, then people don't belong. So through that work now, I'll say, I will end, is that it has been a long organizing campaign that the mayor said no, but then we went back and we said, remember that time publicly you committed? And after another year of pushing and working with DMPED and local developers, there was an RFP, the residents helped shape the RFP, and we were able to negotiate in the long term the right to return for the first time in the nation, not only for former heads of households, but for children and grandchildren. And that's because residents sat at the table at every single one of those meetings. Numerous times the mayor tried to divide us by fear, and I'm not against any mayor, just government agencies, I will say, and who said, hey, look, how about, I see some laughs, sorry about that. It's going to be recorded. But it was clear that there were moments and opportunities we wanted to work with the district, but it was hard to find the money. And I will say that residents, when we had meetings, they were said, well, how come you just make the decision for them? And we said, that's not the way we do this. Every time residents who are directly impacted, who are former residents, had to be in the room, and we make the decisions collectively. So now I just want to say, you go by, please drive by, and the first phase of 350 units are back, and it's mixed income housing. It's going to be a third, 750 total. Family-sized units, which was a huge fight that residents fought for because we literally counted the amount of people in their families of those who wanted to return. And that took a lot of power and a lot of pushing to create belonging. And that's another example of how we try to do that.
That's incredible. Vanessa, one thing I really liked about Allison's answer there was this sense of how the past is linked to what our future is. And I think it's really interesting with another finding in the report, which was that compared with 2020, the last time the report was done, DMV residents have become less positive in their views about who will benefit from changes in the area. In 2020, 27% said that changes would benefit me or people like me, but that's now down to about 19%. In addition, 1 in 4 white residents believe changes in their area will benefit people like them, compared with 14% amongst people of color. For you, as you're thinking about this, like people's sense of what their future is like is less bright. And I'd love for if you could link that sense of like all these generations, these legacies of harm, and have to be repaired, and you have to link the past with the present. I'd love for you to do that for us.
Well, I just moved here in January, so I'm going to do my best. But, I can tell you how I think about it with the work that I'm doing now with cultivating repairs. So just to give a little bit of a headline to this, my work is really focused on how we heal the harms from the legacies of slavery and colonialism. So again, just easy squeezy, lemon peasy kind of task. Of course not. And much like what the question you're asking me, it's a really, really big question. I think that embedded in the question is something that already is transformational. And what some of the prior panelists really highlighted is that philanthropy tends to highlight problems in terms of programs. It tends to highlight things in terms of what's easy and measurable and photographable and easily definable, and the world just isn't that clean. It's kind of like if we were all living inside of a randomized control trial. Oops, we don't. So when we talk about repairing across time, across context, across race, across class, across difference, it's really about how do you How do you create space for the relationships, for people to build trust, to build shared knowledge, to move through conflict in a way where it's not like my experience and your experience are different, so therefore they're at odds, but one of us has to win. Like, it's moving past that zero-sum mentality, that zero-sum mindset, and really trying to create a space where there is psychological safety, where you are building trust, you are building relationships, where there's space for that social capital and that social cohesion to emerge. I can say with my work, specifically with repair, like what we are also really attuned to the fact is that we don't have a particularly healthy or robust culture of repair in this country. Every time throughout history that folks have tried to redress wrongs, whether it is event-based or whether it's talking about systems and structures, there's some measure of progress and then there's always backlash. So there's the one thing that you can rely on, like the sun coming up in the morning. And so if we know that, if we can predict and know that that's the impact that's coming when we're talking about repair, a lot of what my work is also trying to say is, how do we create space and opportunities for people to see, feel, and experience what repair is like, what that means, where they can see it in their own lives, where they can see it in the lives of people who are like them, in an effort to really, again, create that space for that trust, that knowledge, and that lived experience where people can really live into that. And then the last piece that really, when we talk about historical context, is also shining a light on the industry that I'm sitting in within philanthropy. In what ways has philanthropy caused harm? In what ways have we been bystanders to harm? And how can we act in a way that acknowledges that harm, like first and foremost, and then certainly acts in ways to course correct and address the harm that has already taken place. And so that is a big thing that we are exploring now with this work, like how do we do that and how do we begin resourcing the work that's already happening in such a way that that can actually take place.
Wendy, I think Vanessa does such a wonderful job about talking about these cycles and these that are structural, that are systemic. I'd love for you to take it down to the individual level, because I think that's where you operate really well, and talk about reconciliation and healing, I think, are powerful concepts for you, and what it means for individuals within these systems, like philanthropy or like government. Like, how does it feel, and how do you find a way to reconcile and heal as an individual within these systems?
I want to, because something that, yes, I will answer that question, but I want to also just reiterate, I may not make friends in the room, but you know, I'm not about popularity. It's about truth. And one of the things that you said that was really important with regard to harm being inflicted is I want to also say that the systems and philanthropy also intentionally perpetuate harm just by merely continuing to do the same thing over and over again. Okay? So, and that part has to be acknowledged, which is the other part of the healing process. So, and this is a large part of my work, because you can't get to systems change if you don't do the acknowledgement of harm. Like, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? That's usually when we go into community, that's the first question that we ask. And it's not going to be one singular answer. And there'll be different views on that, but that's okay, because we're going to create a safe space. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear what you have to say. Yes, I will use my systems data, but what's usually important and most informative is understanding qualitatively what are the stories that are behind these data. So I don't, and I just want to correct, I don't work at the individual level. It's community resilience. But community is made up of a collection of individuals with individual experiences. And how people are able to connect to one another is how you create the sense of community. There's a whole documentary about the process and how we do this on my website. It's free to download, and you can watch it. But what I will say is it took 10 years to get to where we're getting to real, measurable, systemic change in one of our cities. We started our work in 2015 with a small coalition of people in 5 cities across the country, one of them being Cincinnati, Ohio. And that group of individuals, we started around adverse childhood experiences, because I figured it's grounded in science. It's also, when you look at public health data, 50% of the United States population has experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. So this is about all of us. It's not about just those people over there. Now, we know that depending upon your sexual orientation, your race, your economic level, you may experience more than one ACE, and not just one in your lifetime, but it could be several that accumulate over the time of your childhood. So it was a real grounding opportunity to just kind of get in there, to start talking about not what are people doing to each other, but how are our systems actually perpetuating this harm or creating the conditions where this harm is more likely to happen than a positive outcome for our children. And one of the first things, being subversive, I said is, you know what's missing from the science here? Is the acknowledgement of racism as an adverse childhood experience. And I was in a room full of white pediatricians. And they said, Wendy, you're taking us too far. BCR's taking a wrong turn if we're going to talk about racism. Really? You said you wanted to be a part of the community. You wanted to have a relationship with community. You wanted to be authentically engaged in community. How can you authentically engage when you're not willing to acknowledge what is an adverse experience, not just for this child, but for their parents, for their grandparents, for their great-grandparents? When you're talking about intergenerational poverty, you're not talking about choices. You're talking about intentional outcomes that are perpetuated by systems and policies. And you want to tell me that we can't acknowledge that? You have the white coat. You have the power. Your ability to actually speak that truth and work in the systems, in the places where they can't be, is how you use your power and how you authentically engage. This was part of a national meeting. I thought for sure, and I was still writing my dissertation at that time, and I thought, well, there goes my project. I guess I'm going to have to start from square one. But what we had done was build a community of trust amongst these practitioners, that while they were discomforted by the conversation, they were willing to stay at the table. This was before White Fragility was written. This was real life. And folks said, you know what? I trust you. And I trust everybody on your team, and I trust this coalition of members. Let's stick with this. Let's roll up our sleeves, and let's go further. So that when the summer of 2020 hit, they were ready. It wasn't about reading books. It was like, how are we going to actually confront this truth? And so we launched the Truth and Equity, not Truth and Reconciliation, because it wasn't just about we want to hear each other. It wasn't about a trauma tour. It was, how do we use these data, this experience, to really begin to precisely pinpoint what are the policies that have been driving inequity in our city? And what it really came down to was the city's 1948 master plan and the investment in urban renewal projects that devastated an entire neighborhood. So we started, and that's what the documentary really does go into great detail about that devastation. But fast forward, here this had been something that it was the 1948 plan. This neighborhood that was completely wiped out is just blocks from City Hall. But it took a documentary and this community coalition and all of those collective voices to say precisely, this is the problem that we are trying to solve. To get an apology from the mayor last summer. They actually asked my team to write the apology because we had all the data that had been collected about the number of buildings, the number of people displaced, the number of theaters, churches, schools, businesses. And people, if they were lucky, got a penny on the dollar. That same story can be told right here in Washington, D.C. It can be told in a number of different cities across the country. But the difference is that we took intentionally 10 years to build a community coalition. We trained community advocates on how to understand what does a city budget look like, that a city budget is a moral document. They are telling you what they value by where they spend their money, just like you do with your pocketbook. So by the time the film came out and by the time folks were really charged up because they had watched it, but they had also been a part of the research team and helping us do the research, they had their talking points down. And the city was just, oh yeah, and by the way, we took advantage of the fact that every one of those city council members, and the mayor included, ran on a platform of equity. Okay, put your money where your mouth is.
We found the opportunity, we've done the research, here's the opportunity for change. And so that's how you work with individuals to create coalitions. And, particularly as researchers, it's not, my chair is on me, you need to write, I will publish. I will. But it's more important when you have this opportunity to affect real systems change. And so that's how we do this. It's like being extremely intentional, but the power is with the community. So philanthropists, we are, in fact, I'm on a tour this summer to really talk to philanthropists about, how do we do this in a way that does affect change? And not just, moving the pieces of the cheese around on the board every 4 or 5 years because we've got somebody on the board has decided this is our priority, this is what we should do. Because we never get forward when we keep changing course.
Allison, themes we've talked quite a bit about agency and also a sense of empowerment, which is striking because when it comes to issues facing their local communities, residents of the DMV, according to the report, are most likely to assign responsibility for that to those changes to their mayors and to local government officials and state governments. However, those same residents feel limited in their ability to sway government decision-making. It has a major bearing on the quality of civic engagement, and you, as someone who's running a civic engagement organization, I think is well versed to answer this in terms of people's trust in elected officials. Only 4 in 10 people in this area say they have no influence at all in terms of how local government decision making is done. And so I want to ask you, how does a sense of empowerment and the work that you do hopefully help people feel belonging, feel like they belong, and have that capacity to thrive and help foster a sense of real empowerment and agency in their community?
Well, that's a great question. So I think one thing tying back to agency to remember is that we cannot create belonging for anyone else. We can create, and we must create, the conditions for belonging. And that is, I believe, the calling for all of us to do that, and use, again, our power, our agency to be able to shape and not only shift policy, because we see a lot of policy within the district that has been, particularly since the pandemic, progressive. But it has not been funded. And I think one of the things that we often talk about in our organizing work is we've got to create political will. Political will that lasts long term, and political will that is not just within one community. It has to be across, because it makes us stronger. And so there's 2 things I'll name. One is I'm also an ordained minister in a progressive Baptist tradition, and my Hebrew professor always said to us, I'll never forget, no matter how long it's been, is that justice means, when you translate tzedek, justice means right relationship. And you cannot have justice without relationship. You can't have it as a distance. It's not a theory. It is people, and it is relationship. Your prime example, Dr. Ellis, of how your relational power and trust cultivated, moved, and reshaped a system is beautiful, and that is our hope. That is what we push for, that we can build relationships across race, class, and religion, not only because it's meaningful and it's profound and we need one another, and I do not believe we can achieve liberation alone, but also because it's a good tactic. Because think about when we talk about looking at the Black Panthers, when did they become real radical? When the Rainbow Coalition, when they started organizing people across race and class, when they organized the Latino communities and the white communities who were poor and low income. That's what scares people in power. When we come together and we're not afraid, as you said, which is a huge tactic, we're not afraid because we know that we have another's back. And not everyone's going to be able to move towards that. And maybe I'll lose friends on that too, but I do think that we have to recognize not every congregation, not every nonprofit wants to come with us. Because over the years, we have learned numerous times, you're putting tension on politicians. And we want to be friends. We help get them elected. Well, we have to put in tension, we believe, to be able to create change. And it's healthy tension. Tension doesn't mean we're just going to come, up and punch someone, right? But it means, like, if you are saying, as a public official, that you believe public safety should be prevention-based on our campaigns, and that you should support communities who need violence interrupters, and are telling you that one of the main things for the past 20 years is access to jobs, and real jobs, then if you're not doing it, yes, we are going to hold you accountable, not as your personal moral, compass, but as a political person, as your public figure, we are going to hold that accountable, and that tension can be hard. And I want to name that we cannot do it again alone. And the key that we have to teach, and we do teach our groups, is that we have to work across, particularly in the district, across race. We are so divided. And again, not in a theory, but we have to name it and we have to teach it. We spend so much time teaching the history and of the structures of the district. Where is redlining? Where are restrictive covenants? We had our Black pastors and our Jewish pastors actually hold up in a meeting recently, restrictive covenants on their own home. And talking about certain spaces that they were not allowed to be in. And even though that may have changed, it's still here. We see it, the repercussions of it. One, we have to name that and we have to shift that. And two, it's still in these systems. Again, as you talked about our moral document, our budget right now is a huge fight. We are working with our allies in the ecosystem of change all across who are doing advocacy and mobilizing and organizing, and politicians trying to figure out how do we reshape this budget to not drop all of the hard work that we have done for the last 10 years. And I see some nods in here because I know many of you have done this work. And it's hard. And so the piece that I want to leave with you on this is that, again, we cannot do it alone. So fast back to 3 years is that we began listening in our congregations, particularly east of the river, led by our pastors in Ward 7 and 8, hearing kind of right in the middle of the pandemic, what are the biggest things that you are caring about right now? And one of the two things really were safety, public safety and violence. And then the other was many seniors within our congregations who had been here for generations, had bought their homes, wanted to pass those homes down, but really, when they wanted to pass them down, their kids didn't want them because they needed a new roof, they needed new floors, they needed all these investments. We went to the district and they said, well, we just don't have enough money. We do have one program for the single family, roof rehab. We were like, great. So we started talking to folks in that program who tried to get in. People had been waiting 6 years to get a new roof. We realized that nobody was working together. There's a huge lack. And we really pushed to be able to make this connection between what we knew, the IRA funding coming down federally, and how it could support Black home ownership. So we started a campaign that was led from our congregations east of the river called Black Equity Through Home Ownership as a way to build wealth and help people maintain wealth. And again, we were able to be a partner this time with the district to be able to get the $10 million for the Black home ownership strike force and be a part of the strike force. The problem is we need more power to make sure it's going to the people that we're really organizing. The area median income, this is the power to keep and sustain. The area median income was moved up in that program. We wanted it to be people who we had worked with, who were working, making $80,000, $70,000, $60,000, who are working, and if can get into a home, can maintain a mortgage. But it shifted up to 120 for people who we could bring into the district, not people that needed to stay. And when we had conversations with government officials around this, the first conversations we said we really want to push Black home ownership and ensure that we can build wealth and maintain wealth. The response was to our pastors in the room, middle-class Black people are not organized. And our pastors leaned forward and said, well, we're organizing them. Government officials shifted, a little bit. And then our rabbi leaned forward and said, I'm in Ward 3 in a synagogue with 6,000 members, and I'm organizing my people to support their work. Everything changed. 5 minutes later, that's when our analysis that we've done around Black home ownership went through across district agencies that I will not name and everywhere to be able to start that conversation and make it happen. We need one another. Not only spiritually and emotionally, but because right now, the reason that mattered is not because he was a white Jewish man, not because he was in Ward 3, but because when we break it down, we looked at and helped our folks analyze the power. 60% of our tax base comes from one ward. 60% of our tax base comes from 10% of the population. That 10% happens to live in Ward 3. So when we're trying to think about our elected officials and our government officials where we're moving things, we have to be able to help reshape and use collective solidarity organizing. And I think that people do feel less ability to affect that because we don't have relationship. We don't have relationship, and more wealth is being pocketed in certain places. And I want to spend time talking about Citizens United and corporate power, but that's another panel, huh?
We're going to save some time for audience questions. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add something. So, as a former athlete, as well as I had to take physics all the way through college. I thought it was because of medical school. There are 2 principles, though, from these very disparate things that I've added to my work that I think you actually summed up. First was about tension. As a weightlifter, or those who have raised sons who aspire to be weightlifters, you've probably heard the term time under tension. Time under tension is for what? To build muscle. So yes, tension is good, because when we have our community members applying that tension, that's how we have power. From physics, the formula for power is mass over velocity. Think about that. We have an opportunity to build power by formatting that mass of individuals and then just providing a little bit of momentum, the velocity. That's how we get to power. So just physics, time and attention, and we did great science. Thank you.
Are there any audience questions? I think we're going around with the mic, and in the meantime, I just really want everyone to give a round of applause here for Allison. Any questions from the audience? If they don't, I still have one more since we have a couple of minutes. And Vanessa, I want to end with you here because there's a positive finding report that I'm going to turn into a negative. But a positive finding from the report is that overwhelmingly, majorities of DMV residents say that the area is a good place for them to live with their families and for families, and so 73%, for example, say it's a great place to live for families with children. 63% say it's a great place to live for LGBTQ folks, immigrants from other countries, 63%. So big majorities here, and which is a great thing to hear. Here's how I'm spinning it. Who's left out? Who's left out? How do we get closer to 100%, and what would that look like?
You just really throwing me on the softballs here. I think one thing to note, and that I also remind people, especially because of the nature of the work that I'm focused on repair, is that like we have never had the multiracial democracy that we are striving to create. So with that said, none of us knows exactly what in the world we're doing. And like you said, collective power to come together and to figure out what it is that we are trying to build is imperative. So when I think about who is left out and what it looks like to be on the other side of this, you know, in my work, a lot of what gets talked about is reparations. So just like as a little bit of knowledge, like you can Google this because I'm probably going to forget all 5. But if you look at the UN framework for reparations, there are actually 5 facets to reparations. The one that people focus on the most and that is in the news the most is financial compensation, which, yes, of course, is imperative. There are local DC-based reparations going on right now that if you would like to learn about and be involved with, you certainly can do so. And I invite you to do so because it's meant to be a process that invites in community, that brings in community to inform that. And there are other qualities of reparations that are really about this notion of like, that point to where we could be. So other conditions of reparations are an apology. Another is restitution. So it's this notion of, had you not gone through the trauma, the harm, the event, the injury that got you to where you are now, where would you be? And so restitution is about restoring you to where you ought to have been had the thing not happened to you. That involves a lot of different things that are beyond finances, that are beyond assets, that are beyond wealth, that is about social capital, it's about education, it's about health, it's about legal status for a lot of folks. And so, you know, once you start getting to the restitution, and then there's a number of other things too that are problematic with how we've constructed our society, non-repetition. We have institutions and systems and structures that are continuing to cause the harm that reparations are meant to redress. It is not enough to look at a single point in time and say, oh, we're done, you got your check, we can walk away now. That's not what reparations are about. They're ultimately, yes, about how do we redress what has happened before in the past, and about what does our future need to be like? Who do we need to be within this future in order for this to never happen again? And that is a monumental task, and it's one that will require all of us. It's really about why one of my grantees, Literation Ventures, recently published an article in SSRI that's about like how reparations are key to our multiracial democracy, because we need to be able to see ourselves and know that it is possible for us to live together, to work across difference, to see the values that we share in order to have the DMV be a lovely place for us to live.
Powerful stuff. Thank you so much, Vanessa.